Well, excellent, everyone. Let me get started. My name is Paul O'Brien. I'll be moderating this panel. Very sorry I couldn't be with you there. I'm stuck out here in beautiful Wyoming, thanks to the travel delays that I think most of you have heard about. And I really wanted to be there because I think actually person-to-person communication is pretty important. And I think those of us out here in red states tend to maybe stay in our bubbles. And I suspect some of you out there in blue state America stay in your bubbles as well. And I would encourage you to come out here and talk to people, and just to get a complete view. So our session title is ESG opportunities and detractors, and I feel we've already covered a lot of that. That topic has been seeping into a lot of the panels and conversations we've already heard. So that's great, but I'll give it my own context, which is, ESG is all over the financial sector, right? I mean, pretty much it's hard to find a non or an anti-ESG investor. And yet, despite all the attention in capital markets and among investors, are we really having enough of an impact? Certainly carbon emissions around the world are nowhere near the path necessary to achieve, say, a 1.5 or even, quite frankly, a 2-degree amount of warming. And in addition, ESG seems to be stirring up a lot of political opposition. We already heard today about Larry Fink not using the term anymore. We are going to use the term in this panel because we don't have a new one yet. But I do think we have to ask ourselves, as somebody on a panel did earlier, why is this happening? And have ESG investors been contributing somewhat. So we're going to go first, hit some quick intros. Then I've got plenty of questions for the panel, but I'm definitely planning on leaving 10, 15 minutes for audience contributions as well. First off, panel, are all 4 of you okay with this being not under Chatham House rules? That's fine. I'm sure you'll be outspoken anyway, and yes. We're looking forward to that. Just my quick intro. I'm a trustee of the Wyoming retirement system. We're about a $10 billion fund that covers pretty much all the state and county local workers here in Wyoming. And by the way, anything I say is only on my own behalf. I'm not representing the board of WRS or WRS itself. But in the past, I've been deputy CIO at a big sovereign wealth fund in Abu Dhabi. I've worked as an economist, portfolio manager. So I've looked at this issue from an awful lot of perspectives. And I do have to say, I come down on the fiduciary responsibility side of the ledger when I think about investing. I don't think fiduciary responsibility precludes thinking about E or S or G, but I do think it puts some boundaries on what an investor or what a portfolio can do. But let's go into intros, and I think, let me start. Is that Irene at the end? I can't. Yes. Why don't we start with you, please, and just go across, briefly introduce yourself and how you fit into this topic. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. My name is Irene Aldridge, and I am delighted to be here. It's a fantastic audience and amazing, interesting discussion. I teach at Cornell and I teach at Cambridge universities in the UK. My specialty is AI and all the sorts of new technologies that AI brings to the market, and et cetera, including ESG. I must admit, I am ex-climate change denier. Shocking, but we are our family, all our kids are into skiing, and I can see firsthand as the rain versus snow line in upstate New York is crawling up. And it's every year there's where the divide is between where it's snowing, where it's raining, it is actually moving. So it used to be south of Albany, and now it's north of Albany. I also happen to be president of the Gorski Club. So, and we're very, very concerned about what's going to happen there. I do have a company or two. I actually do have a portfolio of fintech companies. And where we actively develop and try to commercialize these technologies as well. And I think it's very exciting that there are so many people who care and care in a very productive way. And I'm just grateful to be here.
Thank you, Irene. So my name's Bryan Gurhy. I'm from the World Bank. I'm a senior financial sector specialist. So I basically work on government debt management, capital market development, and obviously being in the World Bank, there's a lot of work on climate finance, nature-based finance, ESG investing. We focus quite a bit on sovereign debt. So we have the ESG data portal, which is one of the key data sources for the industry, for ESG providers, for credit rating agencies, and so on. So a lot of the last panel resonated quite a bit. So looking forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Banat. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Adrian, for organizing this. It's a little intimidating because I know some of you in the audience, and I think most of you know more than I do, but it's still a privilege to be up here. I spent over 30 years in financial services, capital markets, at investment banks, at an asset manager or two, and including at a pension fund where being a fiduciary was extremely important. And now I'm more or less retired. I'm on one public company board that has an oil and gas technology that's going to generate carbon credits for all of you. And it's a privilege to be here. And I've enjoyed meeting all my fellow panelists, and I know you will too.
Thank you, Catherine and Paul and Adrian, for organizing this. It's a great conference, and I echo Catherine's sentiments here. You guys, there's a lot of experts I see in this audience, so I wish we could actually have more of a roundtable discussion than a presentation. I welcome your feedback. So my background, I guess, most relevant, I served as the CIO and Deputy CEO of the KIC, which is Korea's sovereign wealth fund. It's about a $200 billion sovereign wealth fund. I served there for 4 years. And then subsequently, I set up a couple of institutes for sovereign funds. And about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we founded the Responsible Asset Allocator Initiative, where we work with, over 200 of the largest asset allocators in the world. And we define that as sovereign wealth funds, public pensions, or government pensions. And we work with them on how to deploy their capital responsibly and sustainably. And one of the things we do is we also we evaluate them on their responsible investing practices. So I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you all. We've got a great panel. I'm really looking forward to getting, the diversity of views that we have up there. I want to start with Bryan and sort of ask from a global perspective, looking across the world, how is ESG doing, I guess, particularly on climate goals, but other goals as well? Are the results that we see commensurate with the efforts that investors are making?
Thanks, Paul. So I think what we're really seeing is kind of the financial sector evolving, and it's changing at different paces. So different actors are kind of adjusting, and I kind of see this globally. So issuers are obviously, some issuers are more proactive than others. Some have issued green bonds or sustainability linked bonds. We see credit rating agencies, ESG data providers, the information architecture also kind of evolve and adjusting. And we see the asset owners, the fund managers also integrating ESG. So this kind of is a transformation that's slow. It's not going to happen overnight. So I think it has had impact. I think there's still, and we touched on some of these issues previously, there's still a lot of conflation between risk and impact. I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of asset owners as well, because the actual information architecture doesn't really support. If you want to like have more of an investment impact or outcome or measurement of your investment, it's extremely hard to actually get data for that. So we at the World Bank, for example, like there was some discussion this morning about ESG scores being forward-looking. Like based on the analysis that we've done at the bank on sovereign ESG scores, like these scores are in no way forward-looking at all. Most of them don't really include climate considerations in any meaningful way. And these scores are essentially one of the key information pieces in the ESG investment process. I think on the credit rating side as well, like given that they're so embedded in the financial system, when we speak to the credit rating agencies, it comes across that they are integrating ESG issues. They would argue that they always have, if it's material from a credit perspective. But I think even from their perspective, it's incredibly challenging because you have this time horizon challenge where like many of these ESG issues are much longer term issues. And then the financial sector is inherently short-term focus. Like Mark Carney called it the tragedy of the horizons. I think we had another expression this morning to describe it. But I think they're kind of fundamental impediments really to kind of take ESG, or we in the World Bank don't talk so much about ESG. We talk more about sustainability, and really to move to the next level, I think the entire ecosphere really needs to adjust, and that's not going to happen overnight. I think as well, maybe just to conclude, one other point is that the financial sector can only do so much. So it's not going to change everything, and we shouldn't overpromise or have very, very significant expectations. Obviously, financial return is the overriding consideration for many asset owners. That perspective is changing in some geographies. It's been driven by regulation. It's been driven by society as well. That's not going to happen overnight. But I think government policies also has a big impact. So I can leave it there. Thanks, Paul.
No, thanks, Bryan. Let's put a pin in government policies, because I think we need to maybe come back to that one. But I wanted to ask Irene, because Bryan mentioned data. He mentioned, figuring out what's happening. And when I want to understand data, I think AI, and just huge improvements and increases of technology. That's got to be able to help us in some way. And I hope you could give us some guideposts to maybe what's coming down the pike in that area.
Absolutely. So what we are working with is the fact that AI is able to process a lot more data, right, than people. And it goes back to, like, if you go to a movie theater, when we used to go to movie theaters, those things, all you saw on screen was 24 frames per second, right? And it seemed like a continuous image. And even though those frames, they weren't changing like crazy, they were just moving slightly from one frame to another. So bottom line is, this is what the human brain can do. So what AI helps us do is instantaneously or almost instantaneously process like gazillion data points, right? So, and this can be very well applied to ESG as well. Like, for example, what we're working on, and we have a tentative entity called Able ESG, ableesg.com. But it's basically we're taking all the information that's provided by companies that's filed in annual reports. But there's a lot of data included that uses actual insiders' feedback. Like, for example, shareholders who are dissatisfied with corporate actions of the management, they can file kind of a dissent, right? And they can say, hey, we want more proactive actions in terms of environmental, social governance or whatever. And all of these have to be recorded and publicly available. So what we're doing, we're analyzing all of these, and we came up with some very interesting metrics. For example, we can now separate what companies talk about and in terms of what they're promoting, and universally they tend to promote along the same three axes. Like they want to pump diversity and inclusion, and separately they want to say how good they are on the environment and these other issues, and what they actually do. So what we find that they do is they kind of lump together greenhouse gases and inclusion, and kind of leave it there. And then as far as like issues like emission, they tend to position it as like polar opposite from product quality, right? So that's where a lot of companies in the US at least have a lot of kind of bimodal tug of war, if you will. And this comes out from the data, right? And the last thing is a lot of companies are just concerned with product labeling and want to make sure that everything looks pretty and as presentable to the investors as possible. But you can't fool people who are actually actively involved with the companies and who want more change. And this is what we're picking up in our data, and that's what we're actually able to separate from the whole mass using AI specifically, because there's just so much of it. So that's the core gist of what you can do. But there are just so many other applications that are accessible because the data is now accessible, and there's just a lot that can be done to improve the investment process and really like make investors more comfortable with what's going on. Because of course we probably all know, like the ratings, ratings do not correlate. Most ratings of existing ESG rating companies, they have almost zero correlation to one another. So, and it's been a persistent problem in the academic world. Like how do we actually align these things together, right? There's just so many different metrics, and they all tend to pick up on different things. So, but this is the world we live in, and something we need to take into account.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, one thing I know very well about investing and risk and impact is those are data problems at their heart. And I think there's some really potentially very exciting and impactful innovations coming. I want to turn to Scott now and put him on the spot because he works with institutional investors all over the world. And I'd like him to name names. Maybe not folks in the room, but anyway, who's doing a good job of ESG? And you can define good, and who's not living up to what they claim.
Well, we can focus on the who's not pretty easily. In our scoring system, you know, the tragedy is that the U.S., we cover about 80 U.S. asset allocators, and we cover also, you know, I think 15 in China. And the average scores for the Chinese institutions, the U.S. institutions, are both well below the average score for global asset allocators on responsible investing. And that's a big problem because China and the U.S. together are 40% of global GDP. And if they are below average, how are we going to address these problems? So we kind of need to get our act together. I just want to make a quick plug on 2 points. One, you know, you mentioned this earlier, but I think it's very important that we continue to get the message across that we've got to get politics out of investment decision making. It's really important. And I think that the institutions I work with, whether they're conservative or liberal, in red states or in blue states, kind of doesn't matter. They all agree that we don't want to have politicians telling us what risks we can look at in our portfolios and what risks we can't. So that's very important. The other quick point I wanted to mention is that I think, you know, Irene, you know, is a convert. on, from being a climate denier, but it's just kind of interesting. We are making progress. You'll notice actually that even among those who used to be, out there talking about climate science is a hoax and it's wrong, we don't hear that anymore. Nobody's denying the science anymore. Everybody, there's general agreement, even in the most conservative of circles, that, okay, this is a problem and we need to do something about it. Of course, the interpretation on that side about how to go about that is different. And, we can talk about that. But I think that the conversation has been progressing. There's a general sense, because it's obvious, it's all over. It's like something's going on here and we have to do something about it. In terms of the guys that are good at this, the overall European asset allocators score very highly. We look at 62 of them. The average score for all 62 is about a 78 out of 100. The Asians, not bad. It's really, except for the Chinese. And, if you wanted to know some specific names, is that what you wanted to know, Paul? You wanted me to name names? Name names. Okay.
Name names.
Name names. So in Europe, we think that the Dutch and the Danes, the asset allocators, there are models. For example, PGGM in the Netherlands has come out and said we cannot trade financial returns for social and environmental impact. We want both, and we think that we can achieve both. And we also have the Australians and the New Zealanders, the Canadians. They're also very strong. For example, New Zealand Super made a statement saying, we've always integrated ESG into our decision making, but we also wanted to think about the consequences of our decisions on broader society and the environment, not just the risks to our portfolio, but the outward-looking consequences. And these are guys who are thinking about now, when you think about it, ESG is not a strategy, it's a tool for dealing with systemic risks. And guys have been using ESG tools for a long time to try and figure out how these systemic risks may impact their portfolios, and therefore the returns they can generate, risk-adjusted returns they can generate for their savers. So that's inward looking. But what you're seeing now more and more is that they're trying to think outward. Like, okay, not just what is the impact of these systemic risks on my portfolio, but what are the consequences of my portfolio looking outward broadly? How is it impacting? And trying to understand that, hey, we need to try and perhaps mitigate some of the risks that our portfolio could present more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Scott, because it echoes a lot of the things we've heard earlier about fiduciary responsibility and so on. I think this inward versus outward idea is a very good way to encapsulate that tension. But Catherine, your perspective on actually that question would be really interesting. Is this inside? How much should investors be thinking, inside their portfolio, managing risk, and how much can or should they think about an outside impact? And of course, also you mentioned in our prep call too, to take us beyond the E a little bit, to the dimensions of S and of G and all the other ways that sort of companies and portfolios can affect the world.
Oh my
and do
goodness.
it in 2 minutes, please. No,
Yeah, thank you. I thought that was coming too, Paul.
No.
I actually can answer the first question very quickly. We live in a whole system. It is a holistic financial system. It is a holistic society. And one of the things that I think we really confuse is that we're not all in this together, and it's not all connected. And to think that you can separate the internal from the external might be a nice fiction, because the internal you think you can have control over and the external you can't. But I don't think you can separate those things. And that's what risk management about. And that's what looking at all material financial information allows you to do in an effective financial analysis. So that was 30 seconds, I think.
No,
That
take
leaves
as
me a
much-
minute and a half. That leaves me a minute and a
No.
half to the more complicated part, which is what about the rest? Well, I do think we've spent a lot of time politicizing things because of the politicization of fossil fuels, and particularly in the United States. The Europeans seem to have gotten out of their own way about that, but we have put it in our way. And so I want to just underscore something that Pedro from the United Nations said this morning. He ran an asset and liability study, and climate led to 100 basis point reduction in return from 3.5 to 2.5. So the E is important, but the S and the G seem to be less in the dialogue, and perhaps equally, if not more important than the others. It's all about governance, right? That internal versus external discussion is certainly a governance discussion that should happen at the board level and at other levels throughout an organization. So I think the G is very, very important and cannot be ignored. And if you don't think there's a risk in the G, I suggest you ask companies what has happened to the price of their D&O insurance in the last 3 to 5 years. It's gone up significantly. So the risk in governance has grown. And I love the insurance business because it's very about the numbers. Pedro talked about his actuaries did his study. It's hard to not look at them as the experts in risk. So governance is super important. We've spent a lot of time, and I'm certainly in favor of more women on boards. I think we need diversity in decision making and in thought. My favorite story is about a company called Zillow that when they started had some women on their boards, and it was the women who said, no, you cannot publish all of the information about a homeowner, because what if someone is stalking the woman homeowner? And the men said, but it's public. And they said, yeah, but it's hard to get to, and we're going to make it easy. And the CEO said that saved us billions of dollars in litigation. Diversity of thought. I think on the S, it's many things, but I'm going to also tell one quick story. I'm going to ask a question. How many of you have someone in your life, at home or professionally, who is depressed? They say a third of the country is. So I want to see at least a third of your hands going up, right? Okay, are they productive? Not very. It certainly impacts their productivity. Do you want happy employees or do you want depressed employees? And what does that mean to the bottom line of your company? Right? It's kind of simple. Why is this so hard? All right. Another story. I met someone who bought a casino in Atlantic City when it went bankrupt, famous bankruptcy. And they noticed that there had been 6 kids killed in a gang war around their casino. And they decided to start to hire the kids who were in the gangs. And they hired 15. That program is now at 300. They hire them at age 14 to 20, and they now have 300 people, and they're very, very good employees. As a result, they have no issues of safety around their casino. And because of their investment in the community, they opened their casino 2 months before every other casino after COVID. Now, do you think that affected their bottom line? So we don't think about the S and the G as being dollar oriented, but I hope I may have put a question mark around that for you and the importance of that. We're all in this together, and happy people and productive people all makes for a better planet. So that was my position.
I think that's great. And my 2 cents is I think, yes, investors need to act more like owners and think about the business. And by the way, just my little rant about the way investments are set up. I don't think you can do that when you own thousands of portfolio companies as a big institutional investor. I think we are massively over diversified, and that limits our ability to think of our holdings as something we own, and instead we just think of it as a line item on a portfolio report. But anyway, we're getting near my time, and I've got plenty of questions, but I would certainly want here to open up to the audience and see if there's any questions that are there in the audience.
Come on, don't be shy.
Speak up. Well, not known for being shy. I have a question with respect to the use of AI and the quality of the public information that you're using to determine what investors care about that is not necessarily being highlighted by management. When you talk about that, the only real public information with respect to that would either be statements from equity analysts or fixed income analysts in the business media, because those don't make it to the proxy, they don't make it to the A-CARE, to the 10-CARE, to 10Q, or it would be shareholder proposals that are in the proxy statement of publicly traded U.S. companies that are the result of and I'll just use this word loosely, failure of a company's management and board and an investor who may be an ESG advocate, may be an individual investor or quote unquote gadfly, or could be a social issue investor, a member of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, could be any of those who filed a shareholder proposal. So where the company will dispute, usually in their statement in opposition, what the shareholder has said, and in some cases, companies violently oppose what's been said by the shareholder. So are you getting good data in, and can you just explain that?
Sure. Yeah. So the idea of AI is that I'm an electrical engineer by I did undergrad in that, and it's always been the case in electrical engineering. I was one of two girls at the time, but it was always garbage in, garbage out, right? So if it's data dependency, if you have bad data, then you're going to get bad output. But it's not the case with AI. So AI is based on this big data idea. I have a book on that. It's called Big Data Science and Finance. Sorry, but the idea is that the data quality does not really matter per se. So as long as you have an enormous amount of data, it is going to approach the true distribution of data. So what we're dealing with is exactly these proxy statements. And yes, a lot of them are kind of random. A lot of them are complete outliers, but a lot of them have meat. So when you scan them on a continuous basis, and we're talking about like 365 days a year over the 6,000 or 8,000 public companies in the United States, you're actually extracting meaning on average. Right. So, and you can create these called orthonormal bases or axes or whatever the rating system that's based on these particular inferences. Right. So as a result, it's the individual crazy ideas that are shut down by the management or whatever. They're not necessarily figuring out or sticking out like sore thumbs in the data, but they do inform the overall framework. So they do inform that people care about this stuff and stuff like that. What really matters, however, I'm sorry, I'm taking so much time, is that it's the investor reaction. Okay, so what we can measure is the returns following any particular observation. So we know there are people, perhaps like you, who diligently study, the financial analysts who diligently study individual companies, and they do notice things that are out of the ordinary, or they're positive or negative, and they relay this information to institutional investors who in fact make decisions based on these characteristics. So, and that gives us another kind of separate dimension of what's going on, like how these actions actually impact the investments, and how we can predict going forward on a pretty short-term basis, at least on a quarterly basis, about what is how the market is likely to react to this or that in a particular company. And yes, the NVIDIA report is coming to your desk on Monday. We have 4 interns working on that, Paul. So, so basically it's a different way of thinking about it. So we're not making stuff, or we're not collecting stuff from random stuff from the internet. We're not ChatGPT at all. We're not aspiring. We're not using ChatGPT, right? It's all just completely kind of homegrown stuff. But we're specifically focusing on aggregating and kind of classifying data in a very intelligent way. So. Yeah.
Any other, do we have another question out of the audience?
Yeah.
Okay, because I think this will be the last question. We're getting pretty close to our finishing time.
Thank you. I had a question on the politicization of ESG in the US, and I addressed it to the panel, but maybe Scott has some good sort of insights from the US allocators in terms of how are they currently dealing with that situation? It sounds like, because if you speak up, you're being punished, or you're getting sort of reactions from both camps. And it's hurting the work. So people are starting to sort of do work under the radar and not, speak out that loud anymore. But is that sustainable, right? And so what would be, or what's the echo of, how do you deal with this in the longer term? What would be the solution?
Well, I think the time is ripe for sort of CIOs or the officers in many of these organizations from a variety of different perspectives to be able to come together to make a unified statement about this. And you're already seeing that. You're seeing in red states and in blue states in the US, guys pushing back, saying, look, this is very destructive when you are trying to limit our ability to manage risks for our savers, for the people of our states. So they are pushing back, and they're making cases. I think Paul, in fact, at Wyoming, which is a red state, but they're also pushing. They're pushing back on this. And you're kind of seeing that everywhere. So in a way, one of the consequences of this is that it's actually uniting, I think, asset owners, asset allocators, these state pension funds in the US on this common point. And they may have various views about what they want to do or what kind of risk they want to manage, but I think they're all pretty clear on this. And this, I'm sorry, it's this other point I just have to push on about, is this part of my fiduciary duty to be considering these systemic risks? And, these guys have to, their portfolios are dependent upon the system. And so if the system is not functioning well, then it becomes really difficult to do your job and to make an appropriate risk-adjusted return for your savers. So they have a stake in the system. It's like, how many of you saw the movie Guardians of the Galaxy? All right, remember? Oh, no, you never saw it? Oh, it's a great movie. Okay. All right. Well, there was a famous line there where this rocket raccoon says, so why do you want to save the galaxy anyway? And then, the guy, Quill character, says, because I'm one of the idiots that has to live in the galaxy. And it's kind of like our guys who are managing these portfolios. It's like, yeah, we need to think about the system and these systemic risks because we have to manage our portfolios in this system. And, it's different than, we need to be conscious of these things, and we have to make sure the system is operating correctly. I mean, Swiss Re did a study, and they found that if climate change, they were doing a calibration. If a climate change, if temperature changes by 2 degrees or more, that the consequences on global GDP growth are -5 to 10% from baseline. So it's pretty clear that, if you're managing a portfolio and you're facing that kind of risk, you're going to be concerned about it. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's also interesting to note that at the end of the day, if we don't get this right, it's the taxpayer that bears the burden. Because certainly in New York State, I worked at the New York City pension plan. If we didn't hit our numbers and we ran out of cash, first the New York City taxpayer got stuck with it. But in fact, the pension obligations of the state of New York and the city of New York are senior to the general obligation bonds of the state. And so it's really the taxpayer who's bearing the burden. And so getting taxpayers informed as to what risks they're taking might be an interesting shift of perspective here as well.
Let me just give Bryan 30 seconds for a last word, and then we'll pass.
Yeah, very briefly, thank you. Maybe just on EM, there was a discussion in the last panel on EM. I think the biggest issue in EM is the cost of capital, and that doesn't really come down to ESG at all. It's really de-risking and providing credit enhancements, and for that you really need some sort of scalable solution, which like marginal solutions won't really solve anything. You need kind of something big. And hopefully, this is my own personal opinions. Hopefully, the new leader of the World Bank will kind of bring that new kind of, new kind of agenda in, and hopefully something significant will come.
Great, that's a great point, Bryan. A great place to end. Please, out there, thank my panel. They did a great job, and let's continue. Thanks all. Goodbye.